Good evening, Mr. Speaker. The June 5th forced resignation of Air Force Secretary Michael Wynne and Chief of Staff General T. Michael Mosley represents the first time in the United States history the top uniform and civilian leaders of any service were ousted simultaneously. The actions of Secretary of Defense Gates are totally unprecedented and deserve deeper scrutiny and inquiry. Successful leaders must focus on today's problems while simultaneously anticipating future challenges. The tenures of Mosley and Wynne were defined by these characteristics. They cultivated a service that was second to none. Mosley and Wynne developed and employed new technology, such as the unmanned aerial vehicles that are yielding unparalleled effects on the battlefield. They also recognized that the Air Force has to adapt to its changing world, and they directed the service to build competency in new areas, such as cyberspace and alternative fuels. And finally, Wynne and Mosley took action to recapitalize the Air Force's aging fleet with a wide array of assets, including the tanker, the F-22, and the next-generation bombers. These are steps that will prove essential as the service confronts future challenges. Secretary Gates' real reasons for the firing of Secretary Wynne and General Mosley may never be known. However, I've come to believe that his stated reasons do not necessarily match up with reality. The publicity stated reason was primarily because of the violations in sending nuclear control units to Taiwan. Perhaps the real reason for the firing is because of disagreements on the strategic defense of this nation. The parts that were in violation were removed from the nuclear control list in 1991. The parts shipped were just special lamps. Mosley and Wynne had approved a correction on this matter and were spending over $1 billion to make those corrections. If Secretary Gates or others in the Pentagon had some concerns, they could have voiced those concerns much earlier. In addition, it is important for the Secretary to release the full report by Admiral Kirtland Donnell, who investigated the case of the mistaken shipment to Taiwan. Admiral Donnell's findings directly led to the firing of Mosley and Wynne, and the report should be made public as soon as possible. I call on the Secretary tonight to make this report public. Now, there have been reports that Mosley and Wynne constantly clashed with the Secretary of Defense office over greater procurements of the F-22. In order to avoid a showdown with the Air Force, the Defense Department decided that instead of closing down the F-22 line, it would restrict how many planes the Air Force could buy and leave the ultimate decision to the next generation. The F-22 will serve as replacement for the aging F-117s and F-15s. The Air Force needs a minimum of 381 F-22s to fill out its 10 air and space expeditionary forces. However, it has been authorized and funded only for 183. As a result, the Air Force must keep selected F-15s and F-16s in service much longer than expected. Mosley and Wynne fought hard for the F-22 against the wishes of Secretary Gates and his office. Now, considering the impressive record of General Mosley and Secretary Wynne, one must ask, why were they forced to resign? While I certainly understand and share the Secretary's concern regarding the Air Force's control over its nuclear inventory, I think the reason for the firing extends far past his publicly stated reason. We had a clash of philosophies here. Mosley and Wynne were not leaders that were content with simply towing the line for today. They were pushing hard for the future. This garnered much criticism, and with it suggesting that it is impossible to adequately focus on today's challenge if one is thinking about the future. That's what Secretary Gates believed. He even went so far as to deliver a speech where he disparagingly termed this concept as, quote, next war-itis. Is it not the responsibility of the Secretary of Defense to plan for the future defense of this nation? Many mistakes that Mosley and Wynne were blamed for can be laid squarely at the feet of the Pentagon leadership. Without a real commitment from the Secretary of Defense's office, many of these problems will persist. To ignore this trend is simply irresponsible. General Mosley and Secretary Wynne understood this. Unfortunately, it led to their dismissal.